the trade balance is very negative in this country. We import way more than what we export, and our main partner is the US. So when that happened, many goods went through the roof in prices because many goods we consume are imported from the US.
Yeah, Bitcoin could easily go to $1 million because we can easily make even though it feels like a similar kind of volatility. Bitcoin is already $1.6 million. And I'm here with Javier. Thank you very much for joining me. Really appreciate it, Mr. Sarez. You are from the Dominican Republic, and you are a Bitcoiner. You work in the Bitcoin space, and so very excited to be speaking with you. I don't know very much about your background besides Cornell, besides you working for Blockware, but I would love to hear your Bitcoin story. And really, one of the reasons why we got talking is because I think it's just another perspective that many Americans don't have, and I think that's a shame. Americans in general, perhaps we don't think too much about the world outside our borders, but especially when it comes to Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and the territories and nations, let's say, right to the south of our border besides Mexico, we tend to forget they even exist. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing all of that about you personally, your Bitcoin story, and about the region of the world that you are from. So yeah, take it away.
Thank you very much for the invite. I became a fan of your work since you went viral. That first thread that exploded the Bitcoin Twitter. So it's like Bitcoin Twitter is surreal. Like here I'm talking with you and recording a YouTube video. So thank you for the opportunity. So a little bit about me. I'm born and raised here in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. Let's say middle-class family. Went to the university and studied business administration, then did a master in international economics, and started my career working in logistics, different companies, Crowley Logistics, also Marítima Dominicana. And then I worked around 10 years in logistics. Then an opportunity presented itself in the U.S. Commerce Department, but here in the U.S. Embassy in Santo Domingo. The U.S. Embassy, most people when they hear U.S. Embassy, they think about the consulate, and visas and etc. But many U.S. embassies it's like a whole U.S. government in that nation. So the U.S. Embassy here has Commerce Department, Agriculture, etc., like a whole mini U.S. government. So I worked there for almost 7 years, helping U.S. companies do business in the DR and in the Caribbean, because this wasn't a regional office. And I did that for almost 7 years. So in 2021, connecting my experience to Bitcoin, my cousin had talked to me about Bitcoin several times. Like I remember in 2020, he called me in March 2020, just as the pandemic was starting, like, hey man, you gotta get into Bitcoin. The halving is coming up, and they didn't know what he was talking about. And the normal response, like, oh, I don't know, that's speculative, volatile. What almost every one of us first say on the first approach. And then almost a year after that, January 2021, he said, oh, just download this wallet and send me the number and letters it says when you click receive Bitcoin, and give me that. And then he transferred me $30 worth of Bitcoin. And at that same time, it was when Bitcoin was around 30K, like mid phase of the bull run. So I had those $30, and as a rookie, you start checking it like several times a day, and that $30 were 31, 33, 34, and this is interesting. So I started doing some DCA, investing a little bit more, and then went through the rabbit hole, read the book, The Bitcoin Standard, several other books, and just found it as an opportunity to invest because, as you mentioned, sometimes people born and raised in the U.S., I could say maybe take for granted some things that people have, like the ease of investing, of the ease of opening an account. But for us, it's like super hard to invest in an ETF or buy stocks. But well, I get to that later. So regarding the Bitcoin journey. I was working at the embassy, and I was working remote. And then they tell us like, come back to the office. And I got used for working 2 years remotely from my house. And it was like a, a point in my life where I had to make a choice. Like I go back to an office and put away Bitcoin, like not put away, but when you're in Bitcoin, you're all day checking Twitter, looking charts, reading podcasts. And if I got back to an office, I will have to put that on a second plane. So at the same time, I said, well, I have to get a career in Bitcoin. That's the dream. And the website from Pump Crypto Jobs, I kept checking every day for job positions. And luckily, this position at Blockware had like my name on it because they were looking for a logistics coordinator that had experience or interest in Bitcoin. So I sent my resume and they called me like 2 hours after that. And yeah, I talked with my wife and made the jump. It was like risky. I guess many people still think I'm crazy for leaving uh, a very good job at the U.S. Embassy. Being a developing country, working for the U.S. government is like the dream for many people. And it's okay for them to think about like that because many people work there for 20, 30 years. I was working there for 7 years and I was still for some people like the new guy. So many people make a career there, but I started working at Blockware. I've been there since April 2022 and learning a lot. So connecting that to what I was saying earlier regarding the Dominican Republic and what people sometimes take for granted. I remember Lynn Alden posted a tweet that said, if you had to conserve your wealth for 2 years and could not touch that money, what would you put it? And she later said that she was surprised by many of the responses because many people, she thought that maybe all people would say, oh, gold or ETFs, but some of the responses were or Bitcoin, or even someone said like cars because the used market cars is like crazy and people buy cars to preserve their wealth. So she even said that what I'm saying, that sometimes the US, the Americans take for granted the ease of investing. For example, let's say I wanted to buy stocks. I will have to open an account in a company that accepts Dominicans. For example, I tried to open one a couple of years ago in one of the companies. No, I'm not gonna say names just in case, but I opened it after jumping several. I did it after jumping several hurdles and having calls, and then like 6 months later, they sent me an email. Oh, we decided to close it for the Dominican market. So they allowed me to withdraw the money, but they just closed it. And it is a very big company, like a very well-known stocks broker. And if I want to use another one, I can. But for example, I have a US dollar account in the bank, but not every people has. Like the poverty index here in the DR is around 30%. And at least for in DR statistics, that's people that live on month on less than $400 a month. Yeah, $400 a month per family. That's obviously very little money.
Per family or per person?
Per family.
Per family.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
like the poverty line. And those people, being honest, won't have a US dollar account. They probably barely have a peso, a Dominican peso account. So that's a 30% of the 11 million population that you already have to cut off of having that opportunity. So if you're, let's say, middle class, to have a US dollar account, you have to a lot of documentation. You have to have a $500 of minimum balance. Like, it's not that huge money, but that's $500 that you just have to have there sitting around. And then you have to make wires to that international broker, and that's like $30. And then yes, you can do it. You can buy an ETF, buy gold, but it's it's very hard for people in the Dominican Republic. So Bitcoin presented that opportunity for many people like myself. Instead, let's say I like to buy gold, but I'm buying gold, but I'm buying paper gold in an ETF of an international company that can say, "Oh no, we're closing for the Dominicans," or "No, must meet this requirement in order to make a purchase in our site." So Bitcoin, is it better than me. It's permissionless. It's border free, so I can just buy Bitcoin with my credit card. Some banks don't like that, but there's a couple of companies that do OTC uh, purchase and selling here of Bitcoin, so it's quite easy here to purchase Bitcoin. What's not that clear, and for example, if you want to sell Bitcoin, you can, but the regulations are not clear. Like it's not illegal, but let's say I bought 10 Bitcoin when it was $100, and then now I'm a millionaire, and I want to sell that and buy houses or cars or whatever. It's hard to convert that to local currency because there's no much regulation. And I bet you that if I go to the local IRS and tell them, oh, I have Bitcoin, I sold them, they tax me, they'll probably didn't won't even know like what to do, how. Yeah, there's just like a small communication like went out in 2017, like you have to pay 27% on capital gains, but just that's just like a small memo. It's not even like a law or something like that. So converting that money to actual local currency is complicated. People do it, but many people are at their own risk. Uh, I haven't done it, so it's not a worry for myself. I'm just purchasing and holding. So that's a problem for later, I guess. And you can always go to another country, and it's a competition for countries for adoption. Salvador is super attractive. Other countries are starting to fight, like, oh, US is pushing people away, and other countries are doing the opposite. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So
That's a
well,
lot.
that yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. The thing you said that I think perhaps stuck out most to me was that, here in America, we hear all the time about how Americans are Americans in poverty or this, that, the other. But in America, that's however many dollars a year, whatever it is, 15, $20,000 a year. But in the Dominican Republic, like you said, that's less than $500 per family. In the States, I think it's per person. But in Dominican, well, actually, let me look it up. Um, okay, so in the United States,
Yes, I just confirm. Yeah, it's per family the amount I gave. Just confirming.
yeah, uh, yeah. Okay, so for an individual in the United States, the poverty line is 14,500. So it's like $1,000 a month, and in Dominican Republic, it is $500 per month per family. So it's
400. Yeah,
perhaps,
yeah. And
yeah,
yes, things here are cheaper, and but yeah, it's still a lot of less money. Yeah.
yeah. And I think, well, it's a lot less money, and we're talking about, let's see, you said 3 million, so that's, you said 30% of 11 million, so that's 3 million, 4 million people
Yes,
that
exactly.
are right outside our border. It's very interesting. I think if we had that many Americans that had that tight of finances, I think it'd be very different. And to your point, like you said, things are cheaper there, but I think I don't think it's absurd to say that, the average house, the average car is perhaps not as high. It's not as affluent, let's say, as here in the States. So anyway, I just find that fascinating that um, in America we have many politicians and many people that are focused on people in the poverty line. Well, we have poor people in America too. It's
Yeah.
like, yes, that's true, but it's in general, it's very different. So, but yeah, you covered so much. It was all wonderful. I'd love to hear more about like your own personal experience being there now that you see the world through this different lens. Obviously, the Bitcoin standard on your back shelf there.
Yeah.
So you didn't have the Bitcoin lens. Now you do have the Bitcoin lens. How do you view the challenges and difficulties that face the Dominican Republic, that face communities, families there. How has your view been the same, and how has it changed with this complete worldview shift that you've had over the last 2 years, couple years?
Yeah, I'd say the mostly the shift is like uh, looking at the lack of education, and the education doesn't cover like financials. You start to talking to people like, oh, what do you think of investing or saving, or they just know basically what their parents told them. So, oh, you save money or X%, but in schools or even universities, you don't get taught that much about investing, making choices, having a budget. So I think that's the main challenge, lack of education. Most people don't like to read, so the learning curve on Bitcoin is high. I say, it's not something that you get in like 20 minutes or 1 hour. Let's hope your documentary changes that. So yeah, it's not like there's not a crash course or that you get Bitcoin in 30, 60 minutes. So the attention span of people is very short. They you send them a video of 40 minutes, but they'll skip it and just switch to Instagram and start, watching different dumb videos. But I say the lack of education and the lack of money as well, because to for most people to start investing in something that Bitcoin, we always say, oh, start with some money that you can afford to lose or are willing to lose. But for, as we were discussing, for people with so little money, that's not an option. If you're living on $400 a month, it's not like you can do a DCA or even don't have the maybe you don't have internet in your house, you don't have a Wi-Fi, you cannot connect to your web, to your channel to learn. Like, you don't have the opportunity. And also with the education, the lack of people that know English, like many people don't have the proficiency to maybe watch one of your videos or any video in English and understand it right off the bat. And there's content in Spanish, but English is still, will be for many years, I guess, the universal language. So not knowing English, I think, is a barrier for many people. And now that you mention, it's something that I noticed that is a barrier here. It's many people think that, oh, it's a scam, it's volatile, it's this and that. But the problem is we've had here is that we've had our own fair share of mini SBFs, mini FTX scenarios. People, and it's, well, I cannot say if it's worse or not, but for example, people saying, "Oh, give me X amount of money and I'll pay you interest because I will invest it in crypto or on next project and give you 20% interest per month." And people believe in those people, and well, they get wrecked because, yeah, at the end of the day, those people weren't even trading or investing. It was just like a regular Ponzi scheme. So when you look for, you search cryptomonedas or Bitcoin in República Dominicana, probably what you find is news of people going to jail, like, oh, they grabbed this guy that was stealing millions, or this guy is going to jail, this company is being sued. So those are the headlines here in the Dominican Republic, for and for crypto and for Bitcoin. So you'll see like a headline of, oh, this happened, this guy stole millions, and in the background you'll see the face of the guy and the Bitcoin logo. So people are associating those scams to Bitcoin. So when sometimes I wear a Bitcoin shirt, people have stopped me in the street like, oh, did you lose money there? because I lost the $4,000 because X company stole from me. There are like 3 or 4 famous cases here in the DR that basically did the same thing. So yeah, people see Bitcoin and people see one of those companies that stole money from them or for someone they probably know. So yeah, that lack of education of thinking that of not knowing that when someone promises you something too good to be true, it's probably a scam. And maybe people are so close to poverty like to think that that'll be like the lottery ticket. And yeah, I think that's the main challenge, lack of education.
Yeah, and I think we see that everywhere. That when people are tighter on money, when people have lower incomes, or when people are thinking in shorter time preferences, that their desperation increases. You know, we see this all the time also in history with examples of hyperinflation or examples of war or conflict, where if the future is increasingly uncertain, whether that's from a lack of income or that's from war, whatever the cause, when there's an increasing lack of certainty in the future, people are more willing to gamble that future away. And oftentimes that comes in the form of lottery. And I also think alcoholism or drugs or other things are also escapes from that. They're different than the lottery, but I
Yeah.
think it's all kind of compounded by that nihilism and that lack of hope and optimism for the future. I was in Guatemala this February of 2023. I was there recently, and I was amazed how often I heard from people there that alcoholism was a major problem, and that
Wow.
yeah, that I mean, and that's not the whole nation, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's just the 3 or 4 cities I was at. But oftentimes, what I heard the most common cause of family splitting up was alcohol, or that dad goes off and drinks, or the kids don't have a dad because dad goes off and drinks, or whatever. It was very fascinating to me because it's alcoholism is obviously a problem here too in the U.S.,
Yeah.
which is perhaps just as interesting because despite our prosperity, we have our vices. But I guess my question there being that do you see those kinds of vices or that kind of desperation, let's say, compounded by a lack of vehicle for savings, compounded by the lack of economic certainty, let's say, and what do you think those tend to be? Does that tend to be lottery or these kind of scams you're thinking of, or
Yeah, I'd say alcohol as well. Like as you say, for Guatemala, like not everybody, but alcohol and the lottery is very big here. And sports, like for example, let's say, people is complaining like, oh, there's no money in the street, I'm broke. But when the local baseball is like very big here, so when there's a good baseball game, like the stadium is full, and you see people drinking, spending their money. So we say like, oh, there's some money in the street, but everyone's going to the ball game and spending lots of money. So yeah, I'd say sports and lottery. And something I wanted to say that you wanted to compare sometimes the mindset of the US and other countries. I know, for example, many people in the Bitcoin community says, "Oh, stable coins are garbage, only Bitcoin." But for example, for us in the third world countries, if you tell me, I'd rather have um, 10K in USDT than in a local bank in US dollars,
wow.
because because for example, local banks here have done it sometimes like, oh, you can only withdraw uh, $500 per day for of your own money of your own, because there's not enough dollars circulating. Here we have the Dominican peso, the national currency with its own central bank, but the dollar is not legal tender, but it's a very dollarized economy. For example, if I want to buy a car and I go to the Kia website, for example, the prices will be in dollars, not in Dominican pesos, even
Yeah.
though Dominican pesos is the only legal tender and legal currency for transactions. So the dollar is obviously very big here, and people like to save in dollars. But
So even though the US dollar is not the legal currency there, people still price everything in US dollars because it's what's more stable And
Yeah, exactly.
wow, yeah, and that's fascinating when it comes to Bitcoin, because I think most people say, well, no one will use Bitcoin. But my question is, what happens when the dollar becomes just as volatile as Bitcoin? You know, and perhaps that
Yeah,
doesn't happen in the United States overnight. It won't. It'll take a very long time. But I mean, if you look at places like Turkey, Argentina, and perhaps even the Dominican Republic, you know, the volatility of their fiat currency is significantly higher than what we're used to here in the States.
yeah.
And so for many people, that doesn't sound nearly as absurd as it does to us here in the West, because for them it's just so they're already pricing in a currency they don't use every on a day-to-day basis. And so anyway, that's do you think do you think that people there it seems like people there are have hesitancy with Bitcoin because of the scams and the scam history there. But when it comes to that volatility question, do you think that they care as much about the volatility as we do here in the West? Obviously, people there do care, but like, how does that compare? Like, does this
Yeah,
volatility thing? Because here it's like that's the concern, that despite everything, oh, it's too volatile. But
yeah, that's a good question. I think here we give it less importance because, for example, Bitcoin didn't exist back then, but in 2000 and 2004, we had a very bad government, and corruption is very big in here in many developing countries. But for example, I don't know, they don't have the exact number. Everyone can look it up, but the exchange rate from the Dominican peso to the US dollar, like, went from 25 pesos for a dollar to like 50 something pesos for a dollar. Like, it, uh, the value went in half in like months. That's around 2004. So yeah, people saw this is a very, uh, in, let's say the trade balance is very negative in this country. We import way more than what we export, and our main partner is the US. So when what that happened, many goods went through the roof in prices, because many goods we consume is are imported from the US. Many materials, many products are built with US uh, products. So yeah, the prices went to the roof, and a very small percentage of the population earns in dollars versus pesos. So it was crazy, and that's something very fresh in most people's minds that at least were alive back then. So yeah, when they see Bitcoin, it's volatile, but yeah, you can holding Dominican peso could be more volatile and even worse, because people are starting to get that central banks can print all the money they want. So yes, holding dollars here is an option, but it can happen that the bank withdraws, stops withdraws, and say, like in Argentina, it happened. They call the el corralito, like they put a limit on withdrawals to $250 per day, and the government at some point even converted the U.S. deposits to the local currency, so you didn't have any warranty that those dollars would be dollars in the next months. So yeah, people is getting more aware of that. So I think yes, in other countries like Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Turkey, Argentina, it's different than the US, because as you say, in the US you have the dollar. The being American, if I was born in Florida and born and raised in Florida, I know the dollar. The dollar is all I've known, and even bigger than that is that the dollar is basically the world reserve currency. So the currency that you have been raised and used all your life is like the king of the world. That's not the case in our countries. Like you can see the valuation of different currencies versus the dollar. So yes, I think in that sense it's easier for us to understand.
yeah, definitely. And perhaps that's the thing that Americans take ultimately for granted. You know, I mean, even more than water and food and shelter, perhaps we take our money for granted because it's something that's more intangible. It's hard to put our finger on. Yeah, that's very interesting. I have a visual here I want to pull up.
I'm glad that you're taking the time to learn about Bitcoin, learn about Bitcoin's potential future value, both in terms of political currency units and on society as a whole. And I'm really glad that you're taking the effort to study and educate yourself about Bitcoin. However, I must make this message incredibly clear. If you are learning about Bitcoin, you must begin also learning about self-custody and taking possession of your own keys. This is really, really important. You can watch as many YouTube videos as you want talking about how Bitcoin is going to skyrocket in fiat price and how the number is going to go up. You can talk about that all you want. You can daydream about this kind of vertical spike action for Bitcoin. You can daydream about this all you want. But my encouragement to you is that this is not a meme. This is not something to be taken lightly. We can think that this is a good thing, and it is a good thing ultimately for Bitcoin's long-term adoption, but this is real. Okay, this really happens in countries. It may not happen in your country for some time. It may happen in a stair-step fashion, but this is not a meme. This is not a joke. And so, therefore, you need to take self-custody really, really seriously. Okay. I work full-time in self-custody solutions for people. I help people set up their multi-sig vaults. I help people set up their estate plans. I help people with a collaborative custody partnership and collaborative custody models. Okay. This is a chart of the amount of interest we have at the Bitcoin Advisor, the company I work at. Okay. This is not me personally. This is the whole company. We've been in business 7 years. Not a single client of ours has ever lost a single sat. Okay. We have a good number of clients, and this is our demand. My point in showing you this chart, my point in showing you this message right now is that it is increasingly urgent, increasingly important that you begin taking self-custody very seriously. I'm telling you, I'm on the inside of this all day, every day, 6 days a week, and demand for self-custody is skyrocketing, okay? The kinds of clients we have, the number of clients we have, the conviction in the clients we have, it is only going up, okay? And people are booking meetings with me weeks, okay, in advance. In some cases, over a month in advance. And we are in bear market, okay? This chart right here is from October 2023. Okay, like incredible low interest globally in Bitcoin, and our demand is still skyrocketing, it's still spiking. And my encouragement is that if we have a bull run, if we have parabolic spikes such as this, where Bitcoin goes rapidly upwards in terms of price, if we have these periods of time, okay, transaction fees are going to spike. Okay, exchanges are going to halt withdrawals. Okay, people are going to panic. They're going to smash by any price. Okay, it's going to be increasingly difficult to have any time with people to help you in your self-custody setups. So first and foremost, whatever you do, whether you work with me at the Bitcoin Advisor, whether you go somewhere else, whether you figure it out on your own, whatever the case, please start figuring out self-custody, hot wallets, cold wallets, cold wallets, single sig, multi-sig, whatever you do, just start figuring it out now, because I'm increasingly alarmed by the number of Bitcoiners that do not have self-custody. So please, if you have any Bitcoin self-custody, but especially if you have a large amount of Bitcoin in self-custody, please start taking this stuff seriously, because it's only going to be increasingly important in the future. And so, if you like to work with me, if you like to hear my opinions, perspectives, and ideas on this topic, you can find me at the Bitcoin Advisor. This is precisely why I work at the Bitcoin Advisor, because I believe this is such an important topic here, okay? You can find me there. You can have expert guidance on how to self-custody Bitcoin, to buy, secure, and store it properly for the long term. We can have tailored strategies for you, what your long-term vision is, both for yourself, your own individual future, your retirement, and for your future generations as well. Again, multi-sig vaults, estate plans, all these things for you, okay? You can just book a free meeting with me here, and the link down below in the description. Again, the first consultation is completely free, where we can talk about your priorities and see if there's a value add both for you and for the Bitcoin Advisor as well. And again, our goal is to help you have generational wealth for you and your loved ones and your children without losing sleep, okay? And that's why not only do you get a free initial consultation, but you have dozens and dozens of pages of education about multi-sig, self-custody, how to store your Bitcoin properly, things to avoid, things to pursue, okay? Again, dozens and dozens of pages of free education for you to be learning about this increasingly important, increasingly urgent topic, okay? And then you can learn further about the Bitcoin Advisor and why we provide much more value for half the cost of our competitors. You can learn about all this and more in that link in the description, where you can book a free consultation with me at the Bitcoin Advisor. So again, whatever you do, whether you work with me at the Bitcoin Advisor or you try to figure it out on your own, please just start taking action now. Because in a couple of years, higher and higher net worth people are going to be entering the space and demanding self-custody. Okay, more and more companies, more and more charities, more and more pension funds, more and more churches, all these things, all these groups of people, all these entities are going to be coming into Bitcoin very quickly, and they'll be willing to pay the transaction fees. They'll be willing to pay whatever fiat price and get for their sats. They'll be willing to do the self-custody as fast as possible. And so my encouragement to you, again, I'm glad you're enjoying these videos. I really appreciate you subscribing and commenting and being a part of these videos and increasing your Bitcoin education. But please, please, please do not stop at the end of this video. Immediately after you watch the end of this video, please start taking your self-custody seriously, whether that's with me at the Bitcoin Advisor, again, link in description, or it's on your own. Whatever the case, please just do it. Thank you.
Yeah, so we were just talking about the dollar, or the peso versus the dollar, And so you were talking about this here in late 2004, right? The fall of the
Yes, between
Dominican peso.
2002 and 2004. Yes.
Yeah, so that was a fall of over 50%, you said, right?
Yes.
That people are not able to save. So volatility is the kind of volatility that we're not used to here. And then this is almost just as brutal, just this continued downward slope here for the last 20 years. So are people people are clearly aware of this in the Dominican Republic in everything you're describing, in that everything's priced in dollars, but can they use the kind of jargon and the kind of language that we in the Bitcoin space use about how the Dominican peso is a weaker currency than the dollar, reserve asset? Like do they can feel the problem, but do they properly ascribe the problem? Do they properly describe what the issue is? Or do you think that there's some misunderstandings of why the peso is weaker than the dollar?
No, I think there sadly is mostly misunderstanding, and there's not enough like curiosity to know what's the difference. And yeah, many people say, "Oh, inflation, the milk is getting the carton of milk is getting more expensive," but most people don't go deeper in why is that, what's the how the central bank works. Many people still think that our currency is backed by gold or dollars when it's not. So yeah, there's a lot of lack of education, a lot of confusion, and yeah, people just like most people just live their day to day and think about their next paycheck. And that I'd love to tell you something different, like, oh yes, this is the next Salvador. People is like pushing for this and that, but no, sadly, the truth is different. I try to do my part, giving books. I've given like 10 copies of the Spanish version of Bitcoin Standard, Patron Bitcoin, but there's so much you can do. You can give books to the people, but if they don't put out like the 20-30 minutes per day to read or to be curious, it's hard. I've been kind of frustrated on that, on trying to get more people to know. Most friends and family, I don't bring up the subject because I don't want to be this like. I've tried with some people. My mom has a few satoshis, but most friends don't go deep into the subject. But luckily, there's a few communities here that are very good, and we meet several times per year, and we talk with each other. We have our own Discord channel and Telegram channel. So at least between the few that are trying to do better and understand, at least we can talk among us. So that's something positive, I'd say. Something different that, well, many people sometimes don't realize, because many people say, oh, the DR or X country can be the next Salvador. And for El Salvador, I think it was different than many countries, because for El Salvador, the only legal tender was the dollar. They didn't have had like their own currency when they adopted Bitcoin as a Bitcoin standard. So, for example, let's say that someone would try to do that here in the DR, having corruption and people with their own agenda, it will be different. It will be hard to convince like the central bank to adopt Bitcoin, because the Salvador didn't have that problem. But here in the DR, you have a government that has control over the central bank, and they can print all the pesos they want. So Bitcoin is a huge opposite on that. So you'll have to convince a lot of politicians of not losing control, because you can have the Dominican peso and Bitcoin, and you can do that in other countries. But having central banks is a major hurdle for for having more countries adopt legal tender, I think.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Have you ever gone to the Bitcoin conference in Miami?
No, I
No.
bought
Okay.
I bought the ticket for next year's already.
Oh,
But yeah.
oh, good. Yeah. Well, I asked because when I was there, I'd never been to Miami before, and it was very fascinating how many people there were from Latin America or South America. Whether from Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, or Venezuela. Let's see, Colombia, Bolivia, El Salvador, of course. I don't think I met anyone from Guatemala. I met people from Costa Rica, but there were people from all over there, and it was fascinating with them because it's it, it's just amazing in this space where people come from different perspectives, and yet it's the same story over and over. Is that where they're from? Either there's a history of war, or there's a history
Yeah.
of economic turmoil, or here in the States, even you have the history of depressions and recessions. And so everyone has these vastly different cultures, and yet they have these ultimate same problems that we need a way to save. We need a way to save consistently that won't be stolen from us, that won't be inflated away from us. We need some form of way of preserving your purchasing power for our future, for our kids. And you said education earlier. Do, how do you think, to be a little more optimistic here, how do you think that having that sound money and having that means of preserving purchasing power, what kinds of exciting things could you see happening with education? In what ways do you think the Dominican Republic is uniquely poised to have a positive influence in the world, whether it's economically or culturally or religiously, whatever you think? I'd be curious to hear if this kind of oppression was not the case there to this degree, and what ways could you see that flourishing in general or through education specifically?
How could it change, you say?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, for being Bitcoin specific, I think people like myself or others for myself, I could do a better job writing stuff, being more active in Twitter, doing more stuff. Like it's not easy, if you have to be the change that you want in the world, like the famous quote says. So I think if the ones that do get it, I think I could do a better job communicating, trying to do more videos, more free stuff, try to to spread the word, and maybe with people get donations to get more copies of the Bitcoin standard in Spanish or other books, trying to continue spreading the word, and doing meetups and preparing presentations in which we explain people what's going on in the world, basically with the currencies, and the country. On the government side, I think education, financial education and budgets should be something that they taught in teaching school, like how to you go out to the university and you are supposed to be a grown up, but in the school they didn't teach you like how to do a budget, what's money, what's inflation. So you graduate from high school and then the world is it's like there's no like guidance on how to be an adult. I think that that's the case in many countries, but I feel being here, that's all I know growing up here. So it's like if your parents didn't taught you well, and not everyone is lucky enough to have good parents. So I think education should be uh, the main point, and the country economically is doing relatively well or very well compared to the region. Tourism is very big here. If you look Dominican Republic in Google, probably beaches will be the first thing you see. So tourism is a big source of revenue here. So I don't know, maybe doing doing Bitcoin conferences, obviously not like the big Bitcoin conference, but doing some that kind of to attract those kind of people like you or people in the Bitcoin world to do some like small conferences here will be something interesting. Like you go to a nice beach and have people educating you. That's something that could be interesting for both the attendees here and the speakers coming. So I think we just have to double down in education, both as the government and both as each of us that do get it, do like Bitcoin. Maybe we just have to spread the word a little better.
Yeah, and it definitely takes time. I think,
Yeah.
I think to your credit, I think a lot of it is just that individually we have to overcome hurdles because we have a different understanding. Once we come to understand money, once we come to understand Bitcoin, and
Yeah.
I think perhaps one of we've talked about this before on other recordings, especially of them, but this idea of exchange rates, and exchange rates being this fuzzy thing that yeah, I mean, at least even myself included, I used to think it was like this absolute thing, where I remember, here in the US, once in a while you see US dollars, Canadian dollars, and it seems like this stable thing, when in reality it's just one open system versus another. It's just one mass hallucination against another, because that's all money is to a
Yeah.
certain degree. It's just different ways of perceiving it. So anyway, I think so much of education just comes down to that, is to people understanding that price is always set at the margins, and all these forms of money are just different political states, and they fluctuate on a variety of factors, but the most important one is supply. Demand fluctuates for a variety of economic or
Yeah.
military
Yeah.
reasons, but supply is the thing that has the greatest degree of fluctuation. So
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
can you enable screen sharing so I can share the exchange
Oh,
rate? I think you have
I
to
I
put
have,
me
I have the
as.
exchange rate pulled up here too. From what to what? What do you want?
Oh, okay. No, no, just the Dominican peso. Oh, the one that you had before. Yeah.
Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here we go.
Yeah. So people, as you were saying, people see that and oh, it's just a chart. And people born and raised in the U.S. just see, oh, I win in I earn dollars, and I can spend dollars, and that doesn't change. People are not used to that exchange rate. But for this, what happened in 2002, 2004, basically, if you wanted to buy, uh, my example, in 2003, I was in high school, basically finishing high school, and I play video games at that time, and a game was, let's say, $60. And in 2002, those $60 were, let's say, 1,000 and a half pesos. But in 2004, though, that video game cost me the double, 3,000 pesos. So in 2 years, this chart, like you see, like, oh, the dollar is pumping, but yeah, that's my income being destroyed in half, and changing in 16, 12 months, my income is being destroyed, because even though in the DR, everything is priced in pesos, as I was saying, uh, we import a lot of stuff, and many people buy on from the internet, from Amazon, and tennis shoes, uh, everything, like everything a normal person buys. So when you pass that credit card in 2002, uh, when you had to pay the balance, you paid them in pesos. So in 2002 it was X amount, and in 2004 it was the same dollars, but you had to pay the double amount of pesos to get them. So
Yeah.
that's a concept that you easily understand it, and everyone in Bitcoin probably does. But for someone maybe that's always live in the US and has not traveled, and has not like going to a small bank to exchange dollars for Argentine pesos, maybe don't get it as easily. Because, for example, when we recently saw videos in Lebanon of the banks closing and not giving the money to the people, that hasn't happened here in the Dominican Republic. But I can relate that. I can relate to that. I can, hopefully not, but that's something that maybe could happen someday here. And here in the DR, we have many immigrants from Venezuela. There's a huge Venezuelan community here, because even though the DR is not a paradise, it's miles away from the US. For many Venezuelans, this is glory. This is a way better place than Venezuela for them. So you see, I have friends that had that same situation, that from one day to the other, their net worth disappeared. They had nice apartments, and they just that's all they are now, just nice apartments that they can sell because they're basically worthless. No one wants to go there, no one wants to invest, so it's easy for us to relate to that. So yeah, it's crazy. I think more people just have to know what money is. Not even like, doesn't have to be an education specifically on Bitcoin. Just like knowing the history of money, the history of fiat currencies. So, but because people sometimes say, "Oh, Bitcoin is not backed by anything," but they don't know that the fiat currencies are not backed by anything. So it's like Bitcoin is backed by more stuff, by a bigger network, by more people than any a fiat currency, but people don't see that. Probably it's just like they don't know why they don't they don't know what they don't know. So it's hard, but we just have to keep pushing.
Yeah, you just said something that's very interesting, that perhaps today Bitcoin is already bigger than all the fiat systems of the world because there are more hardcore Bitcoiners than hardcore anything else. I
Yeah,
don't, let's say there are 1 million hardcore Bitcoiners out there in the world. I don't think they're anywhere close to 100,000 hardcore Dominican
no,
pesoers out there. And I don't
no,
think there's
no,
anywhere near 500,000 or 1 million hardcore euro folks or
no,
hardcore
no.
dollar folks. So if we're just defining the value of a currency by the number of hardcore holders that will hold it literally to zero indefinitely and will not sell, um, in that sense,
Yeah,
Bitcoin's already bigger.
we're
Yeah,
winning. Yeah,
we're already winning winning in that sense. So yeah, and then you said something too about the history of currencies, and that's something I want to emphasize too. That the story you're saying is really nothing new. It's nothing that abnormal. In fact, it is the normal. That for the entirety of human history up to this point, you've had different regions with different currencies, and those currencies trade in relation to each other. And you have one currency that rug pulls their citizens, and they all moved elsewhere, and then
yeah,
they all moved back and
yeah,
forth. And that's exactly what you're saying with your personal example of Venezuela versus Dominican Republic. That people are leaving Venezuela and going to the Dominican Republic, and us Americans could look at that and be like, well, it's all the same thing. It's like, well, it's not the same thing, because the living standards are all relative, and they're so much better in the Dominican Republic. They're willing to travel there, and then maybe just thought experiment, maybe over the course of a couple of decades, if Bitcoin didn't exist, Venezuela and the ashes would rise back up. They'd start building again, and then maybe the opposite happens, where something, God forbid, happens horrible in the Dominican Republic, and then people start moving back to Venezuela. I mean, that's
yeah,
what's happened in all these nations and all these empires for all of history. You have rising empires, falling empires, and people just migrate back and forth over the eons as a function of these complicated factors. But the currency is a consistent
yeah.
complicating factor to all those other complicated factors.
Yeah,
So
and it has been a very short experiment yet, but I see that happening in El Salvador. Like many people didn't want to go because of the gangs and the crime, and now it has basically disappeared. I had friends that have gone there, and it's real. It's not like just Bukele saying it. And for example, when you when I started investing in Bitcoin and thinking about the future and don't know the word of Bitcoin, maybe in 20 years, maybe I wouldn't want to live here. And instead of thinking in the US, I think the Salvador might be an option. And for example, talking about myself, I do want to go to to El Salvador myself with my wife to get to know the country and analyze as the possibility of living there in the future. It's not like I want to leave the DR. I'm comfortable here. A good relationship with my family. It's hard to leave the country where you live if you have a relative good life. But if things get complicated here or happens what happened in Venezuela, that can happen here as well. Salvador is an option, and I wouldn't thought of that 3 years ago. Just reading headlines of the crime and corruption, and now maybe this Bitcoin experiment is, as I said, it's just like what 2 years in the making, but we've seen the changes in El Salvador, and it's just by changing the money. So a very good experiment, and for me it's great because it's very close and it's Spanish speaking. So for me, I want to go there and see with my own eyes, and it's a possibility that for me it's a real scenario to go there and live if they're welcoming Bitcoiners as I read that they are. So yeah, it can change as things can go bad in 5 years. Countries can change their future. This El Salvador might be the Singapore of Latin America in what 10, 15 years. And Bukele, I think the elections are next year and the terms are for 5 years. So we might have him for until 2029. So he has enough time to do something great. So yeah, changing the money obviously changes how the future of a country, and we'll get to see it firsthand.
Yeah, and it's so much harder to build something quickly than destroy something quickly. So
Yeah,
it's amazing that they've been able to do so much in such a short period of time. And then it makes you really think like, wow, what if Bukele is in there till, let's say, the rest of the 2020s, 2029, like you said, and simultaneously most of these other nations have bad leadership for the 2020s. It's like if that happens and we're coming up on 2030 and these both positive effects and negative
yeah.
effects continue just for the rest of this decade, just this one next election cycle, that compounds to some pretty big incentives for people to move there. Like maybe like as soon as
They won't
perhaps,
have enough space.
yeah, they won't have enough space, yeah, it's definitely it's gonna be fun to it's gonna be fun to watch, and
Yeah,
it's very encouraging to see that in El Salvador and talk to so many people in neighboring countries, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Colombia, yeah, and all of them are excited about El Salvador, what's going on there.
yeah,
So, and not just because of Bitcoin, but because of the society that's being built in light of money that sounds. So, um, yeah, it's tying this together. I'd love to look at some charts with you about exchange rates here. So we've been looking at this one. We've looked at it 2 or 3 times now. This is the Dominican peso against the US dollar here. And then we mentioned Argentina earlier. And so
yeah,
likewise, it's the same thing here. And it's been even more dramatic than for you guys in the Dominican Republic, which is
yeah,
amazing, frankly, because Argentina is a much larger country than you guys. Here, let's see, you guys have lost at least half, about 50% of your purchasing power against the dollar over the last
yeah.
20 years or so here. But in Argentina, they have lost 98.8.
Wow.
They've lost they've lost like 10 times as much purchasing power
Yeah,
as you. You've lost half once, but they lost half and then
and
half
half.
and then
Yeah.
half and then half and then half again and again and again. So that's fascinating to me. Do you meet people from Argentina, or do you have? I mean, I know it's you know perhaps a silly question. You're very far away from there, but perhaps you have family or friends that are either
No, for
considering moving
Argentina,
there.
no, but from
No,
Venezuela,
okay.
no. For Argentina, no.
But from Venezuela, is Venezuela
Yeah,
pretty much the majority of the inflation migrants, let's say, for lack of a better word, people leaving because of inflation?
yeah, yeah. People that you see the pictures, like the fiat currency is on the floor because it's basically worthless, and yeah, people like scrambling to buy basic goods like toilet paper. Yeah, it was like
Yeah,
a nightmare scenario. So yeah, people fleeing the country like crazy.
yeah, yeah. This is Turkey. I'm sure you're aware with Turkey.
Yeah,
Very similar thing here. We're looking at 93%, so not quite as bad as Argentina, but still that's significant. It's half and then half and then half again, again, again. And then we were talking about like where I was mentioning the Canadian dollar. This is quite interesting that the Canadian dollar is much it's still
very
volatile,
stable. Yeah,
but it's much more stable than, let's
long
say,
term. Yeah,
yeah, over the long term than the developing world. Same thing true here with the yen. It's up a little bit against the dollar, but how do I get this to go away? There we go. But yeah, over the last 20, 30 years here, it's consistent. And this one's interesting. You'll recognize this one. This is comparing our favorite currency to the US dollar. and how we see Bitcoin is doing in the same way that the exchange rate between your weaker currency and my stronger currency, or Argentina's weaker currency and the dollar is the stronger currency. In the same way, it's true here that the weaker currency continues to go down indefinitely against a stronger currency. And so right here is the Bitcoin crash of last year,
Yeah.
aka the rally of the dollar. And so that if we invert that, of course, we're referring to Bitcoin here. This is Bitcoin US dollars, roughly 30,000 at the time of recording, $30,071. So it's up at the time, but this is interesting to me too. One of the things you hear all the time is that Bitcoin will never get to $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, $10 million, and again, it's just all about that exchange rates. Like I'm out there advocating for, and like you're advocating for, it's simply the exchange rates that Bitcoin could easily go to $1 million because we can easily make $1 million. And I don't know if you ever and I'm leading up to a question here. My question is this: if I could show it for you here, do you think of Bitcoin in terms of US dollars here personally, or do you think of it in terms of your local currency? It's like the same chart here, because obviously while the peso is declining against the dollar at a quote unquote stable rate, even though it feels like a similar kind of volatility, Bitcoin is already $1.6 million in Dominican pesos. So it's like, Bitcoin is at $1.6 million. And so then it was at what, $3 million back at its peak. So when you're saving in Bitcoin, when you're trying to explain Bitcoin to people, do they even think about Bitcoin in terms of US dollars, or are they thinking in terms of pesos? I know you said everything else is priced in dollars. So
no, in terms of dollars, people think of it in dollars.
Everything in terms of dollars. Okay, so when you're talking to someone about Bitcoin, they're thinking of it in terms of, it crashed from 65 to
exactly.
15,000.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. Like, for example, this day I have a friend that I'm trying to get into Bitcoin, and he's still a skeptic. And these days, when it got back above 30, I didn't message. He messaged me and told me, "Oh, it only has to go to double that to go back to its all-time high." Like with sarcasm, like people don't see that in when the COVID crash, it was at 3K, 4K. They just think, oh, in 2021 it was 69, so it's less than half. Oh, it must be garbage. It doesn't work. But people don't see long term. Like the all-time chart of Bitcoin, if you see it, it's just up and to the right, and but people gets lost on that volatility
Unit bias. Unit bias. That's this whole problem, that we think Bitcoin's worth in the tens of thousands of dollars because that's what we're used to, but we forget a couple years ago it was $100. Probably a couple years from now it'll be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in terms of US dollars, not just in terms of pesos, because it's already millions of dollars in terms of pesos. And that's something I tweet about, is that in terms of the lira, or in terms of the Argentine peso,
it's all-time high. Basically.
It's at all-time highs.
Yes.
It's just a matter of having those conversion rates. You just mentioned the long-term trend again, and earlier mentioned to 2020, the COVID crash. So I wanted to pull that up here too. I thought you would appreciate this. Here we go. If we can get this. Yep. So this is something I tweeted recently that I think, and both you and myself, 2020 was a year that we started paying attention to Bitcoin, and one of those reasons was because of societal trust of king, but also the supply peaking. This is something we've been talking about, the price being set at the margins. And so if we look at this visual here, if we can get it to load. Come on, internet, so slow.
Oh yeah, I saw his
yes
what Bitcoin did.
Yes, so obviously here we see the price of Bitcoin over the long term, like you're saying. So right now, this is what most people are used to seeing, this double spike here in the 2020 to 2023 range. That's what most people are used to seeing. But when you zoom out, it's a much more stable curve. And then this is supply available for trade peaked right when you and I started really paying attention. And in this COVID crash, there's the dip of the COVID crash, $4,000 US, like you were just saying, and there's the all-time peak for trade for Bitcoins available to be exchanged on the market, and now it's going down. And so my my concern is, what if this keeps going down? That means at the same time Bitcoin price keeps going up, and then nation states, these central banks like you're talking about, start printing their own currency
Buy
to
Bitcoin.
buy their own Bitcoin position. And so as we wrap up here, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because that's one of my concerns. What happens in these next 5,
Wow.
10 years as we have certain countries and certain companies and banks and places that are improving at an exponential rate, other places are declining at an exponential rate, compounded over time? What happens when this gets to the point where these banks and companies start issuing an infinite amount of stock and an infinite amount of currency to buy in their own position? Like, do you worry for your neighbors, your friends and families? And if you do worry, what is your encouragement to someone that's perhaps listening to this, especially someone in the developing world, to where they can start considering these things early on, to where they can start learning, so that hopefully they figure it out before we reach that inflection
Yeah,
point?
yeah, I do worry about it, and mostly, as you say, about others. I think I'm doing the right thing. I'm putting myself, my family safe by investing in Bitcoin. But yeah, it's something I think about it, and it kind of scares me. Like, people don't pay attention to it, but it's something that could happen. And BlackRock, Fidelity are coming in. The institutions are coming, and it's gonna regardless. It's what's going to happen is the same that happens in everything. That the big players are gonna take over, and the the people like you and me, or the people that are still not in Bitcoin, will have a harder time, or will get on way later. And that's the thing. People don't see that there's a huge opportunity to front run countries, governments, big companies. So what I say to people is what I think Ricardo Salinas said, from Mexico, like, get off zero. It's riskier to not have Bitcoin than to have Bitcoin. Like, get off zero at least 1% of your net worth. It's not like you have to uh, sell your house, sell your car, or invest everything you have. Take an X% of your net worth that you're comfortable with, that lets you sleep at night. Maybe if you are 100% Bitcoin, that's too much, and the volatility will kill you and will not let you sleep. But if you 1% of your net worth, 2%, and I think one of your first threats, you had the amount of Bitcoin and what that could mean in the future, and you don't have to have like half Bitcoin or one Bitcoin to put yourself in maybe a safe place in the future, like 20 or 30 years. Like, right now, 3K buys you uh, 0.1 Bitcoin. $300 buys you 0.01. So depending your net worth, you can get that fraction of Bitcoin that puts you in a better position for the future. So it's that people say it's risky, but as others have said, it's riskier to not have Bitcoin at this point. So you see many smart people doing presidents, well, one president, Bukele, but guys like Michael Saylor, BlackRock. Like, I know BlackRock maybe doesn't have like the best intentions, and it's not like the best company for the world, but you have to let your bias go and know what is Larry think, what does he know, what is he thinking. Like, he knows something that maybe you don't know. So it's so many people of different background, different countries, CEOs are paying attention to something. Maybe don't be so stubborn, like, and swallow your pride and buy $10 of Bitcoin and know how a wallet works, and go from there. But it's many people have a lot of pride and don't want to change that stance. Like, oh no, that's a scam, and just it's again, it's riskier not to have exposure to Bitcoin than to have. I think so.
Yep, I would agree with that. I encourage all the time people to get off zero, and
Yeah,
I think the urgency is much higher for those outside of, let's say, the West, because I think that difficulties will hit them first, let's say, or
yeah,
perhaps more extreme. And obviously that's equally as dependent on the person's individual circumstance and income. But anyway, one way or another, whatever percent you take, it should not be zero.
yeah.
So, um, yeah. really appreciate it. Yeah, anywhere where people can find you, number one, but the number two, how can people support those in the Dominican Republic? You were mentioning conferences. Are there any charities or initiatives, Bitcoin related or not in general, that you think where people can go to support our neighbors down to the south?
Wow, not really that much like a big community, but criptomonedas.do in Twitter, and myself in Twitter, Javier Suarez LCU. Maybe you can tag it on the video. Yeah, but there's not like a huge initiative that gives me something to think about now that you mentioned it. So yeah, that's
Well,
something
great.
maybe. Yeah,
Hopefully this goes far and wide. Hopefully people
yeah,
share this video. Hopefully people follow you, and
yeah,
maybe you can find more like-minded people such as
yeah,
yourself, and
yeah.
we can get something going. That'd be wonderful. So thank you very much. Best wishes to you. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing the positive changes that come in the future. So thank you.
Thank you for your time. Take care.